Again, know me, and I guess most of you know me too, so I might as well just start with introducing myself. I'm Ken Johnson. I work out of MnDOT's Office of Traffic Safety and Technology. I'm the work zone paper marking and traffic devices engineer, so I get involved with a lot of different things. And a few years ago, I started getting involved with rumbles, and so a lot of things have happened over the past few years, a lot of which I'm going to be talking about, so we'll be getting to it. But while we're waiting, do you ever wonder what are the elements that make up life? Well, it turns out that it's lithium and iron. That's chemistry. Li is for lithium, and okay, I apologize. Yeah, it is. You know, my therapist last week, man, she said that I was suffering from narcissistic delusions. You know, I think she was hitting on me. Better? Well, as I get started, we do have a few people online already, and hopefully they're able to hear through the microphone or through the teleconference line that Kelly set up. Kelly will be monitoring the instant messages, Kelly Copy, who works with us on developing these traffic topics. And I probably should mention that there's a core team that works on pulling these traffic topics together. It's Derek Luer, who's back there in the third row with a little grin on his face. Kelly Copy, both from our office, and myself, and we try to bring topics that we think are going to be interesting to the traffic community just to these monthly webinars. And we're still looking at what our next month's might be. I'm working on our speaker, but I'm hoping that it's going to be a tutorial on Giorilla. Giorilla is a fantastic tool that Metro has really been taking advantage of, and I think some of the districts could really benefit from using Giorilla. There are specific tools in there related to temporary traffic control, work zones, and some other things that I think that people would find useful. So anyway, spoiler alert, that's what we're kind of hoping for next month, but we'll see. I'll just jump into the presentation here then. I'm going to talk about sinusoidal rumbles in Minnesota. I gave a similar presentation to this to National ATSA, which is the American Traffic Safety Services Association, and after we got done with it, we thought it'd be useful to get the same information out to the MnDOT folks, because people are hearing different things about rumbles. What are we doing with them? What's the goal? What's happening in each of the districts? And so I tried to pull some of this stuff together so people have a history and understand where we're going with sinusoidal rumbles. So we're going to cover the safety benefit of rumbles, how the rumble tech memo was developed, and what we've had to do based on the problems that we've seen with the previous rumble tech memo. We'll talk about the research that has been going on and is currently going on, and the future, what our expectations are in the near future related to sinusoidal rumbles and rumbles in general. Centerline rumbles have a huge safety benefit. I'm not going to read off all these numbers other than to say you can see large numbers here that indicate a really strong reduction in crashes because of standard centerline rumbles that are getting used. So centerline rumbles have a huge reduction in fatal and injury target crashes, and the target crashes for centerline rumbles run off the road left, head-on, and side flat left. So there are a few target crashes that these really reduce the fatal and injury on that as well. We have nationwide data that we pulled our information in that came up with those numbers on the top of the screen, but Minnesota highway data, it was even more noticeable, the reductions that we're receiving here in Minnesota when we put centerline rumbles out there. So they do make a difference, and they really do reduce crashes. Here is a little chart about the number of crashes that we've had on our two-lane, two-way roads for a 5-year period. For the Ks are the fatal crashes. And so you can see on the state highway, we had 201 fatal crashes, and the deaths that occurred from that were 249. And statewide, there were pretty much double that number. So you can see it's a big issue both on the state highway system as well as on the local road system. On the state highway system, here's an interesting factoid, and I should say that this information was pulled out from a report that Derek Luer did out of our traffic safety unit, looking at what lane departure crashes are resulting in and what our solutions could be. So on the state highway system, what we found is there were 17 fatal crashes in areas with a centerline rumble, but 184 fatal crashes in areas without a centerline rumble. Now the question might be, well, what percent of our system is covered with centerline versus non-centerline? We don't really have a good way to track that. We're still kind of trying to figure out the best way to pool that information together. But suffice it to say, we do know that they do reduce fatal crashes, and with the known safety benefits, what was determined out of that report, if our system were fully covered, all of our rural two-lane, two-way roads were fully covered with centerline rumbles, in that 5-year period, we'd have 75 to 103 people alive today that were lost in that 5-year time frame. It's a prediction, but got some good data behind it. So based on those benefits, MnDOT decided to do a systematic and proactive implementation of rumbles, identifying the roads where they would make the most sense. And through a lot of work back and forth, what we determined is we wanted to target roads that were undivided, high-speed, rural generally. Those are the ones where we have the majority of these types of crashes, and that centerline rumbles can make a difference on those. We targeted the roads with new surfaces because then we can, when the road goes in, we can put it on there as opposed to finding an older road. And we do still advocate for putting them on older roads as a preemptive safety treatment. But if people are concerned about the joint health at that location, there's concerns about how long that's going to last. So we're trying to mitigate that by having rumbles be put on roads with new surfaces. So we're requiring centerline rumbles on all rural high-speed roads with a new surface. We are requiring shoulder rumbles on all high-speed rural roads with a new surface and a shoulder that's equal to or greater than 4 foot. Though we're still advocating for smaller shoulders, but there are areas where there's more bicyclists out there and some other things. So it's still recommended for narrower shoulders, but it's required for the 4 foot shoulders and greater. And when we originally published this, we decided not to include concrete for 2 years because there was a real strong concern over the joint degradation on concrete pavements, and they wanted to explore other means in order to put centerline rumbles on concrete roads. And when we redid the tech memo, which I'll talk about in a second, that was taken into consideration. But the districts ended up dealing with complaints with the centerline rumbles getting put in. There are a lot of other states that have been doing it. Michigan, for instance, they've got 5,400 miles of centerline rumbles on their entire system. We've got, we think, over 800 or 1,000 miles. We're not entirely sure about that. But Michigan has put a lot of them in, and they've been dealing with the noise complaints and essentially just putting them in anyway because of the safety benefit. When we've been putting them in, the majority of the cases, the public has gotten used to them. They understand the benefit of the centerline rumble in those locations. But there are some locations of centerline rumble where they have been removed due to political reasons. And so we are concerned that legislators were going to pass laws limiting their use. We know that it's going to be a safety benefit, but we want to make sure that we can still use them as a tool. So I'm going to do a little bit of an aside here because these things were happening at about the same time. So around the time that we knew this was an issue, we started investigating sinusoidal rumbles. The Local Road Research Board heard about them as well, and they started a study where they were looking at rumble strips of different designs that were sinusoidal to see what the noise results for that were going to be. And on the screen here are the principal investigators for that. The report and the summary are at those links, and we can make those available. This PowerPoint presentation will be on the Traffic Topics website, so you'll be able to get to these links through that. But what that found out, and they tested a few different wavelengths and depths. That's kind of a misprint. The Caltrans rumble that was tried there was 8 inches wide. It was a 14-inch wavelength, and by wavelength I mean that it was 14 inches from the top of the wave pattern to the next top of the wave pattern. So it was 14 inches long there, and it varied from close to the surface, maybe a little bit less, down to ½ an inch. So that's what the Caltrans design was. Sinus was a design that was put forward by Surface Preparation Technologies. They're a contractor out of Pennsylvania that have some partnerships with some Northern European companies in Northern European countries that have been using a sinusoidal rumble strip for a couple of years. And they suggested that we try a 24-inch wavelength with that type of depth. And there were a couple of different depths that were put in there. And so what was found is that both the Caltrans and the Sinus rumble had higher sound levels than bare pavement, but it was much less noticeable. So outside the vehicle, these were quieter, but but what we found is that within the vehicle, the Sinus design was less noticeable within the vehicle. When we went out to Thief River Falls, we had some Sinus rumbles installed out there. That wavelength was 24 inches, as I said, and within the vehicle, it was a rainy day, so we couldn't take those as fully valid readings, but within the vehicle, it was like a 5 to 7 decibel increase, and when you're in the car, knowing that you're hearing the rumble, you could really sense it. But we were concerned that a driver that wasn't paying attention, what would happen to them? Would they really notice that if they were going over the Sinus rumble? So what we found is that the Caltrans overall design was one that we could pursue at that 14-inch wavelength, and we've been going on since then. So here's that parallel. We were working on redeploying the updated RumbleTech memo, and it got deployed in May 2014. A lot of development went up to that. And what came out of that is that the district traffic engineer may gap centerline rumbles near residential homes. We talked about putting some distances in there, but we ended up not, because we wanted to allow the district traffic engineers to have a little bit of flexibility of when they would gap centerline rumbles on rural high-speed roads that are undivided near residential homes. They were also able to gap shoulder rumbles on the inside shoulder of curves. So as you're going around the curve on the inside shoulder, we were getting a lot of nuisance hits where people were drifting and going past the edge line. So if there's a safety edge or a wider shoulder installed in those areas, the district traffic engineer would not have to put the shoulder rumble at that location. And we also changed the allowable designs. The general allowable design for a centerline rumble was a 16-inch wide standard rumble that straddled the joint. So it went across the joint, so it cut into the joint area as well. Some districts asked to use a proposed design that was used for concrete, where you put two 8-inch rumbles on either side of the joint and separated by 4 inches, because you need to have the pavement markings go within the rumble. They wanted to see if they could use that on bituminous pavements, and we talked about it and we allowed it. We thought it was an okay thing to do. So the couple of standard centerline rumbles that are allowed right now is a 16-inch wide